Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So, good morning and welcome back to Shop Everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic Memorial weekend. Before I jump into things here, I want to go over some of the areas of this transom that have been really hanging me up here for the past, well, for quite a while. And I didn't really touch on it much last week because, well, I finally kind of realized what I think is going to be a path going forward here, but I didn't realize that until the 11th hour of the week. So let me turn the camera around and kind of go through some of the details and thought process that I had to get to the point where I'm at for this week. Now, just as an overall umbrella kind of a goal here, I'm looking to finish this transom, but it's not just as straightforward as finishing just this transom. There's a lot of other aspects that come into play here. For example, one, thinking a few steps ahead, I need to think about, how the seating is going to be installed on here and kind of what that design is going to look like. I also need to look at access. Specifically, I need to get a floor or a cover in here over in this open spot, something that's going to be accessible, as needed. And then lastly, and I don't know that these are all in any one particular order because they're priority-wise, they're all number ones. But as part of this flooring in here, I also need to kind of keep into consideration drainage and specifically how water is going to actually be prevented from just pouring straight back into here. Now, as you can see along this back edge, I'm presuming there was something kind of extending across from here all the way over to here originally, and that has since been cut. Now, I don't know what that looked like, so I'm just kind of going off of whatever pictures I can find online and keeping in mind the goal that I have for this back area, how I can design it to make all of that come together. And while I think I put together a plan that I think is going to check all of the boxes here, first let me kind of go over some of the things that I am not going to do, and then we'll jump into how I'm going to tackle the things that I want to do. All right. Now, as part of the small player aspect of all this, one of the things I've been kicking around as far as, how to additionally beef up this transom. Honestly, I don't think I need to do that. The more I'm looking at this, I think I've already got all those bases checked without necessarily making any extensions along these knees with the intention of beefing up the transom. There are going to be knees on here, I suspect, at some point, but the goal of those is not going to be to beef up this transom, and here is why. Now, the overall size of this transom that I have right now is much, much larger than how this was originally. I think originally it only came down to maybe a little bit like right in here. It did not include any of these larger wings coming out. And overall, this transom right now is around 3.5 inches overall thickness. Quite a bit beefier than what was original. Now, as far as why I don't think I need to beef up any of these, the top edge or take it out to the wings. If you look on here, my coring, or the new part of my transom, what you see in white here, it's overlaying on top of a piece of plywood that extends all the way across the top from port to starboard. And then in the corners, I've already beefed up these corners where the transom meets onto the hull here. I've already beefed these up quite a bit. Overall, there's 6 to 8 layers of 1708 on both corners, which is also overlapping the plywood that is running the beam of this transom. So long story short, what that means is that across the top here, the load is already being distributed across the entire beam because my coring is on top of the existing plywood going all the way across, which is 3/4. And I don't think that it's needed. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it would hurt anything, but I don't think the juice is going to be worth the extra effort, certainly not worth the squeeze. Now, as far as figuring out what I want to do back here to accommodate the drainage, the seating, and storage, all that other good stuff, this is all going to become, it's all going to come together in different layers. So one thing is going to build upon another and another and another and so on and so forth. So looking at this, kind of stripping it back to square one, taking in mind I don't need to beef up the transom anymore. Instead, my focus is going to shift towards getting some type of a flooring or a platform across this back edge here, specifically that's going to be watertight. And that was something that was really hanging me up over the past few weeks. So for example, if you're looking around here, now there's already a molded lip here and it's on all three sides, but there's nothing across the back there. Now, if I can find a way to seal off that back edge, then in theory, if I make a cover that's going to fit over this lip all the way around, that's going to make this compartment essentially watertight. Now, the trick or the problem that I was running into is how in the world do I seal off that back edge to accommodate a lip that's going to prevent water from just pouring in like a waterfall off of the cover that's going to be going over top of here. And just, I was having a hell of a time wrapping my head around all that one. But I did finally come up with what I think is going to be a solution. And I teased that one last week, but that's going to be this kind of a design right here. Now, this type of a shape is already somewhat established coming off these corners that have been cut. So if I can take and extend this lip coming up, extend that all the way around. Now essentially what that's going to do is turn this into a little bit of a bathtub. And if I, as part of that lip coming across, if I can incorporate one of these ridges here, I will have literally a sealed lid going over top of this where no water can just dump right in. Now, that brings up the question, all right, well, I know that water is going to be pooling back here. How do I make sure it's not just standing, for freestanding water? Well, I need to create a little bit of a crown across the top from port to starboard so that anything that does, make its way back in here over the top of the lid, it's going to hit the back of the transom and it's going to have to shed one way or the other. Okay, so that's just one design aspect. And then presuming I can get that back part glassed in to the point where it will accommodate a watertight seal, then I can start shifting gears into actually making some additional knees for supports, whether that's going to be support for the center of that actual lid, because this lid is going to be pretty good size. I want to say it looks like it's almost 5 feet wide and maybe 3.5 feet deep. That's quite a bit of a span for something to not be supported. It can be beefed up, but then, that lid is going to be much, much thicker than what I want, which kind of brings up to another issue. There is a bit of a compromise going on. One of the details that I am not real fired up about with this approach that I'm taking here is that I think by the time I have a lid put over top of this, that's going to stick up to the point where it's going to be it's going to be a major toe kick. I'm not real thrilled about that, but I don't know that I have a whole lot of other options. Now, I did chase this idea down. Now, if I were to come in and cut that lip off all the way around, part of removing that lip would also mean losing this additional support here on these little wings of the deck, which are resting directly on these stringers. So if I cut that lip off, now my port and starboard side wings here on the side decks, they're just going to be flopping in the wind, and they need to be beefed up somehow. And at the end of the day, in order to beef that up, it's going to have to come in and it's going to have to be supported by these stringers. So there isn't really any kind of a net gain by cutting these out. All right. And also kind of another downside of this is if I do cut these lips off, now I've just lost the ability to have a cover over top of this that can remain dry. So although the toe kick is going to be a bit of a nuisance and annoyance, I don't know that there's a way to work around that, at least not that I've come up with yet. So there's a lot of different aspects that are all kind of intertwined here, and I know I'm overlooking some of the details, but I can at least see far enough to 2, 3, 4 steps ahead, and beyond that I'll figure it out as I go. That's typically the way that I work, and more oftentimes than not, it seems to work out okay. So now that I have you thoroughly confused, let's get into the build. Now, for doing all the bonding on this, I'm going to be using a product from Total Boat. It is called their Thixo Fast Cure. Now, when you're working with this material, or really any other type of material where it's like a two-part epoxy in a caulking tube, there are a couple of little tricks you should keep in mind before you start gunning this out on your project. First off, this material tends to be fairly thick as far as the viscosity, so it's not always the easiest to try and pump it outside through these self-mixing nozzles. To help with that, it goes a long ways if you can take the tube of Thixo and wrap it in a heating blanket. Let it sit out in the sun. Just let it get warm for a little bit. That reduces the viscosity. It makes it a lot easier for piping it out through this nozzle. Now, speaking of the nozzle, a lot of times when you first are starting a brand new cartridge, the part A and the part B in these cartridges don't come out at the correct ratio initially. They need to be primed. So what I like to do, before you even put the mixing nozzle on, just go ahead and pump out 2-3 shots of the mixture. That way part A and part B become equalized within the tube. Then you can put your mixing tip on there and everything goes beautifully. All right, now it is the following morning, and I think all the material that I laid up on my form here, everything is set up and it's cured and ready to go. Now, this is what I'm going to be using to make that molded profile along that back edge of the transom to accommodate, for the drainage, make sure water just doesn't pour right in there and all that other good stuff. So that's kind of what this was designed for. Now, as far as how I'm going to be able to pop the fiberglass off of here, my plan is to coat all of this in the clear packing tape, which is why I did this little experiment here. Now, a funny little thing when you're talking about plastics and resins, whether it's vinyl ester, polyester, or epoxy, most plastics will play just fine when you're talking about working or setting epoxy material on top of plastic. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have any problem. However, 9 times out of 10, you are going to have a problem with, say, like vinyl ester or polyester resin melting that plastic, or in this case, potentially tape. The issue there is that the styrene. Styrene is some pretty nasty stuff, but it's also the main reducer or thinner in polyester and vinyl ester resins. So I've never tested this tape. This is the tape I use for packing up boxes when I'm shipping out, Alexial orders. So I laid out 2 strips. One of them I poured out some poly, and the other one I poured out some epoxy. Now, as far as the glass that I want to use on my mold here, just because of how intricate all of the little shaping and everything is in here, I would really like to be able to use chop strand matting, because I can tear it, I can tear the edges, all the little wispy bits or edges will kind of overlap, they're intertwined, lock in with one another, and I think it's just going to be able to conform to this type of tight profile much easier than, say, like 1708. However, when you're talking about wetting out chop strand matting, epoxy does not play nice with chop strand matting. I've explained this several times. If you really want to know, ask me down below and I'll answer in the comments. But so ideally, I want to use chop strand matting, which means I need to be able to use polyester resin. And I don't know that the polyester is going to melt this tape. But that was the purpose of the experiment yesterday. So let me start pulling this apart and see how it looks. I'm going to start with the epoxy here because I have a pretty good feeling this is going to fare just fine. Huh. All right, well, all I need to do is just lift the edge of it, get the edge of this epoxy. There we go. Okay, that pulled up perfect. No damage to the tape, but also no real surprise. Now the poly. This is going to be the $1,000,000 question here. I will say though, it doesn't look like the tape melted. But is it actually going to release, or did it melt and become one with the tape? I'm actually very, very surprised. All right, good. That came up no problem, nice and clean. Tape didn't melt. We're in good shape. Chop strand matting, polyester resin it is. All right, now for getting my strips of chop strand matting here, I have tried to explain this to people for forever. And for whatever reason, I can't get the wording together to where it makes sense. But when you're working with chop strand, it is best to tear it rather than cut it. When you cut it, you've got a clean, hard edge here, but that's not always going to be working in your benefit. Instead, it is much better to tear it. This stuff tears pretty easily. If you're finding, if you're pulling it in one direction and all of a sudden it starts fighting you, it doesn't want to tear real easily, come at it from a different direction. A lot of times that takes care of it. And using a nice straight edge here with a crisp edge really goes a long way to make this process pretty easy. Now, when you tear it, well, I'll just kind of show you here. Now, when you tear it, you've got these wispy edges here, right? So what happens is if you're working with, kind of a complicated profile like we are here, you can work with smaller pieces and these edges will overlap and kind of interlock with one another. It's an easy trick or easy hack to make the material conform to tricky profiles and not come back and be royal pain in the butt to work with. All right, I think I have everything all set, staged, ready to go. I've taken my, well, at least the cup I'm going to be pouring the resin in. I've already marked it here. I'm going to be doing 8-ounce batches at a time, and I'm going to be catalyzing this at 1% just to give me a little bit of extra working time. Now, thinking back a couple of weeks ago, where I was having a problem with the resin actually starting to cure, but I'm going to have enough material laid up on here, 3, 4, possibly even 5 layers of chop strand. That thickness alone is going to generate more than enough heat to kind of accelerate things. So even though I'm only catalyzing at 1%, I don't have any concerns that this material is not going to sit up and do its thing. I've also come through and marked how much mech I need to pour out. And for 8 ounces of polyester laminating resin, I'm going to put out 2.5 cc's of mech, which will catalyze it at 1%. Got my fin roller handle taped up so it doesn't get all nasty. A couple of brushes, I may need to grab some more, and a bucket of some acetone for dipping this in between use. So at this point, I think I'm pretty much set and ready to go. I'm probably going to turn on my the air scrubber thing, just because I'm in the wood shop. It's a relatively small area, and there's going to be a lot of resin going down. I don't want to stink myself out, so I'm going to run the air unit. And that should filter everything out. It scrubs all the air in here in, I think, less than a minute. So, yeah, wish me luck. got 2% battery left. All right, so where I left off is I'm just gonna have to stop here for a little bit. Things were kind of starting to shift around. It was getting a little bit squirrely. I was getting a bunch of porcupine, little strands, random strands of glass sticking up, which were going to be problematic if I kept on going. So the way that it stands right now, I've got, with all the overlap, I've got probably 5, maybe even 6 layers of glass over this center hump. And then on this plane, as well as this upper plane here, 2, maybe 3, depending on how far out I come. Now, I think that's going to be fine, at least for right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this set up for a couple of hours. I'm going to coat this with gel coat, with wax, and kick everything off. All right, so now at this point, I'm gonna do a little bit of trimming here. I made it tall and deep on purpose because, you know, the more room I had to lay the glass, the easier it was gonna be to try and make it behave. But I made it too tall. So I'm gonna probably take this, zip the top off right around here, and the same around the bottom. All right, so now this is what I was saying about, you know, if I need to add a little bit extra stiffness on here. Now that it's trimmed up, I can come in on this backside. I'll have to fill in this trough, fill it in with some thickened something or other. But then I have the option, if I want to, take some 1708 and on the full length, just literally have it wrap up, over, and right back over here. So I mean, I can get 2 solid sheets of 1708 on the back of here. And I mean, that'll do a crazy amount for stiffening this up. I mean, it's already, you know, fairly stiff, I guess. But, you know, another thing to keep in mind is that this is going to be sitting on top of, you know what? Let me just show you. All right, so look at the picture here. Now, obviously, this is the part that we just made, and I've got coring down underneath right here. So looking at these sides, I'm gonna end up notching this lip right here out, but in through here, this deck is cored. So what I'm going to end up doing is, you know, notching this out, digging out the coring that's in underneath this right here. I'm going to insert another piece of coring into that channel that's going to extend all the way across. Okay, so that's going to give me, and I'll have that epoxied, glassed in, top and bottom. And then on top of that is going to be this piece, and it's going to tie in something like this. So that back edge right there, that's all going to be glassed together. This lip is going to end up extending in, and let's see, I need a third arc. And then right in through here, this is going to get notched out, and it's going to stay notched so that as water trickles into here, it's going to shed either to port or to starboard, but it's going to shed down. It's going to be able to make its way through this channel right here and then drain right out through the scupper. I really wish these were bigger and not so close to the water line. That would really simplify things. Come on, Bertram. Now, and then once all of that is glassed in and into place, then I can make the hatch that's going to sit on top of this. Now, what I may end up doing is, at least on this center knee right here, I may extending that up height-wise, just to kind of give a little bit of support over this overall lid. But I'll cross that bridge when we get to that point. I want to keep the profile of this lid as low as possible. And already I know I'm going to be looking at, it's going to be sticking up close to 2 inches, which, like I mentioned before, isn't something I'm real keen on. But as it stands right now, I have not come up with a plan B or a plan C at this stage. So for the time being, that's what we're going to run with. And quite honestly, when it comes to doing the install, as far as getting all this stuff glassed into place, that's going to have to be a video in and of itself. So I think right now, I started the editing on this last night. This is already going to be a long video, so I think this is going to be a pretty good breaking point. So, with that said, I'm going to wrap things up. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found this interesting. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for, God damn it, I did it again. Thanks for the time. Thanks for watching. Have a great Memorial weekend. And I'll see you next week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.